Introduction. A while back, the Detroit Writers Guild was housed on West McNichols in Detroit. It was there that Heather Buchanan and I touched on the subject of writing riot stories in her genealogy writing class. I told her my two sisters had actually been in the '67 riot at the very beginning. Every time I thought of them running amok amongst the chaos, a comical image came to mind. The serious thought to write something humorous, not grim, called I Know Who Started the '67 Riot, occurred years before I'd ever mentioned it to Heather, but needless to say, I just never got around to actually writing it. Heather, on the other hand, had started a publishing company, and I knew that when the time would come, she would not only compel people to write their personal riot stories, she would also publish them. Since the time has come, I was also compelled to write my fictitious comical riot tale, only there wasn't anything funny about the 3 paragraphs I'd written. I couldn't sleep. Winnie, whom I shared a bedroom with, had finally made it home. She and Lisa had partied way past curfew. I was about to wake our parents so they could get whooped, but Lisa wasn't with her. Winnie grabbed my arm as I tried to open our bedroom door. "No," she said. "You can't say nothing, not until you hear what I got to say." So I stood there in my pajamas and listened intently. I threw a Molotov cocktail through the big foe's window. I didn't know if them white cops were in that car or not, but I knew I had to get away from there. I couldn't find Sis, so I ran a few blocks till I saw the Claremont bus coming down the street. I kept looking for Lisa, but I was so scared. I hopped the bus and prayed all the way home that Lisa had gotten away. Winnie trembled the whole time she talked. It happened after my two sisters had been to their weekly meeting, which usually ended up as a party of some sort. They were out having a good time with the brothers and sisters up on 12th Street. This particular celebration had turned into a stone-cold homecoming for our male relatives and friends who just returned from NAMM. But things had turned sour when the police raided the joint. Winnie made my 12-year-old mind understand why the dudes kept saying, "I'm so sick and tired of the big folks starting mess." The NAMM brothers had their own war to fight at home and were mad about having had to fight someone else's war. She also said that since the big foe always raided the meetings, folk in there celebrating were ready for him this time. Needless to say, my account took on a serious tone. And since there has never been anything comical about Detroit's historical relationship to its predominantly white law enforcement and its black community, beginning as early as 1833 with a Wayne County sheriff and 2 escaped slaves, I decided to keep the tone serious. During the 1967 riot, the Algiers Motel incident took place, where 3 young black men were shot to death by members of the Detroit Police Department without probable cause at the motel on Woodward Avenue. The police destroyed 2 black culture establishments on the west side of Detroit, located on Dexter Avenue, roughly within the same distance. One business, the Easel Gallery, ran by Glanton Dowdle, the gifted artist who painted the famous Black Madonna portrait, was a small art gallery that contained the works of black artists. According to Detroit, I Do Mind Dying, a study in urban revolution, updated edition by Dan Georgiakis and Marvin Sirkin, during the Great Rebellion, the police destroyed his art gallery and he was shot several times. This writer is not sure if the easel was a rebuilt gallery. A Michigan Chronicle article dated September 9, 1967, written by Betty DeRamus, entitled Glanton Dowdle, Artist, Dropout, Ex-Con, Leader, does not mention any such destruction. The police also firebombed Vaughn's bookstore, the only black-owned bookstore in the city at that time. In a phone interview with me in February 2006, Former bookstore owner Edwin Vaughn said in 1967 a Sergeant Slaughter of the Detroit Police Department accused him of starting the riot. Vaughn's bookstore was also accused of being the headquarters for a black nationalist group, which had been accused of advocating the violent overthrow of the government. The police also said guns were stored in the bookstore. In the 1999 book entitled Dancing in the Street, Motown and the Cultural Politics of Detroit, author Suzanne E. Smith says the police did not deny their involvement and instead defended their actions as necessary. She also said a 10th Precinct sergeant admitted firebombing the bookstore and justified it as a response to reports that guns were being stored inside. Vaughn's co-owner, Polly Ross, said that since the bookstore opened, they had been subjected to a subtle form of harassment by police. Ross also said plainclothes detectives came in often, never purchasing anything for more than 25 cents. The police actually referred to Forum 66, the Voice of Black Unity, a weekly panel discussion on religion, education, Negro history, literature, drama, music, and the arts, hosted by Vaughn at the bookstore. The forum raised the consciousness of the black community as it prepared for the Detroit Black Arts Conference. An extensive Chronicle article dated July 29, 1967, titled Bookstore Destroyed, Witnesses Blame Police, written by Aretha Watkins, stated eyewitnesses said the vandals were members of the police department. The police came in 3 cars around 4 a.m. on July 27, 1967. They trained their police lights on the buildings across from the bookstore to see if anyone was watching. When they thought the area was clear, they used rifle butts to break out the bookstore's windows. They went in and wreaked havoc throughout. In the interview, Vaughn said this was the second firebombing. After the police found they had not totally destroyed the bookstore the first time, they firebombed it. Vaughn said Slaughter stated they would be back. Books salvaged from the first firebombing that had been placed back on the shelves were once again thrown on the floor. Vaughn continued, this time after the police knocked the books back onto the floor, they went into the bathroom and turned on the water faucets, flooding the bookstore, damaging the total bookstore. Damage to the store was between $5,000 to $10,000. After the second firebombing, the community helped get the bookstore cleaned up, back in order, and stocked again. Vaughn said an article written in Publishers Weekly generated free books from all over the country to aid the bookstore in its endeavor to rebuild. Vaughn also said that at the time of the Detroit 67 riot, he wasn't even here but at the Black Power convention held in Newark, and was arrested there for starting the riot back here in Detroit. Although this book contains personal accounts of both the 1943 and 1967 riots, I felt compelled to show readers a brief spattering of other riots that have occurred in Detroit's history. 2 known riots happened in the 19th century in 1833 and 1863, and in the 20th century, 2 not so well-known riots happened in 66 and 1975. My research found that these 4 riots were basically motivated by racial tension, fear of change, or lack of acceptance in the status quo. Depending on the research source, a riot may have been termed insurrection, incident, rebellion, or civil disturbance, but riot, as defined by Webster's dictionary, is a violent public disturbance of the peace by a number of persons specified in law, usually as 3 or more assembled together. 1833. The Northwest Territory was defined in the Ordinance of 1787 as free, but Negro slavery still existed in Michigan. To name a few slaveholders, George McDougal, Joseph Compa, and General John R. Williams, think well-known Detroit streets, were leading citizens of Detroit. Because the Michigan Constitution of 1835 prohibited slavery, Detroit was a safe haven for runaway slaves until they could cross the Detroit River to official freedom in Canada. But if runaways from the South had stayed in Detroit earlier than that, they were not safe because of the fugitive slave law, as in the case of Ruth and Thornton Blackburn, two such escaped slaves from Louisville, Kentucky. According to Clarence M. Burton in his book, The City of Detroit, Michigan, 1701 and 1922, Volume 1, printed in 1922, the majority of Michigan citizens were law-abiding, but thought the slave law was wrong in principle, wantonly cruel, irritating, mischievous, and unjust in the methods of its enforcement. Therefore, they did not obey it. If a person knew of fugitive slaves in the area, he simply did not tell the authorities because, as God was his judge, no power on earth could make him assist to enforce a law which he considered morally wrong and an outrage upon the rights of man. However, it was because of attempts to enforce the fugitive slave law that the Negro insurrection occurred on June 16, 1833. The Blackburns arrived in Detroit in July 1831 and lived as productive citizens for 2 years before their master discovered their whereabouts. Once in Detroit, his slave catcher, sent from Kentucky, contacted Wayne County Sheriff John M. Wilson, who promptly arrested the Blackburns as fugitives from labor in order to detain them in a holding cell for the slave catcher's convenience. They were set to leave the same day on the Ohio, a steamer located on the Detroit River boat dock at the foot of Randolph Street. But some coloreds and whites, there weren't that many, about 400 to 5,000 whites, were not pleased with any of this and took extreme measures of their own to help the slave couple escape. In the meantime, Ruth was able to escape from the jail by switching clothes with Mrs. French, one of 2 female visitors who came to the jail. She made it all the way to Canada unscathed. However, freedom for Thornton, who remained in jail until the next day, was not easy to obtain. According to Reginald Larry in Corners of Black History, on the next day, shortly before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a carriage was driven up to the jail to take Blackburn to the boat. But the delivery was unsuccessful. A melee of folks carried clubs, rocks, and pistols and was able to free Thornton from the law. However, during the melee, the sheriff was badly beaten. He suffered facial cuts, knocked out teeth, and a fractured skull. But whites started a rumor. The niggers have risen and killed the sheriff. Whites then attacked any colored person on the street. They also burned 40 dwellings to the ground, with the colored occupants still in them. Troops from Fort Gratiot were ordered for crowd control, and as a result of this riot, a group originally created as a fire watch group and to keep watch of Indian attacks went on to officially become the Detroit Metropolitan Police Department, according to the History of Detroit and Wayne County in early Michigan, written in 1890 by Silas Farmer. The colored citizens successfully carried out their plan to send the couple to Canada. When Thornton first arrived, however, he was detained in jail for a few days until Canadian officials released him. He eventually joined Ruth and they moved to Toronto, Ontario, and became prominent with considerable property until their deaths. 1863. In an 1863 editorial in the Christian Recorder, the communication vehicle of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, it was written, "We have to chronicle one of the most disgraceful, inhuman, and heathen-like riots ever recorded upon the pages of history. It occurred in the city of Detroit, Michigan. What have the colored people done that they should be thus treated?" In truth, the only 2 things colored people had done was collectively celebrate the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation, and individually, one colored man went to trial for a crime he did not commit. So, what made white people start a riot against the coloreds should have been the question. Wilbur Story, the 1863 editor of the Detroit Free Press, gave whites the ammunition needed to wreak havoc on the colored community by publishing racist sentiments. He said, according to Dancing in the Street, that the Civil War was fought not to preserve the Union, but to ensure nigger domination. However, Matthew Kundiger's 29-page website thesis entitled Racial Rhetoric, the Detroit Free Press, and its part in the Detroit Race Riot of 1863 almost defends Story. It cannot be determined by the research done thus far whether the Free Press caused the prejudices and violence of its readers, or whether the racism of its readers caused the paper to print what it did, Kundiger stated. Labor, the Civil War, citizenship, and morality were the hot issues of the day the Free Press used to show how, if coloreds gained by way of them, that made them a threat to Free Press readers who were, at the time, mostly lower-class working white males who had little power. If the coloreds were to gain, it would put the whites more at risk. It was mainly stories, articles about interracial sex that were against the colors in the months leading up to the riot. The articles were deliberately written to make the coloreds inferior. According to Kundiger, on February 13th, 19th, and 20th, and 21st, 1863, articles on amalgamation affairs or dens appeared in the Free Press. Although whites participated in these events, it was because coloreds did too that the articles were extremely derogatory. A week later, on February 27th, the Free Press reported the Faulkner case and set the tone even further. Kundiger stated, the subheadline reads, "A Negro entraps a little girl into his room and commits a fiendish crime upon her person." At the end of the Civil War, Detroit's population was 45,000, including approximately 1,400 coloreds. The trial for a man whites weren't even sure was colored turned out to be the catalyst that set the 1863 riot off. William Faulkner, the owner of a tavern and eatery, could have been white because he voted the Democratic ticket when that party was against coloreds, or of Spanish Indian heritage, as he claimed to be, or mulatto. Nonetheless, the Free Press repeatedly called him a Negro. Mary Brown, a white girl under the age of 11, said he raped her and possibly molested Ellen Hoover, her acquaintance of the same age who was a colored girl. They had stopped by his establishment to warm their feet while on the way to the post office. Burton stated, Faulkner maintained his innocence and his claim came to be generally accepted, as the girl also confessed that it was a put-up job. But 7 years passed before Faulkner was set free. It was the fact that Mary was white and Faulkner they thought was colored that angered whites. It hadn't been enough that Faulkner had been accused, arrested, sent to jail, and faced trial. The whites wanted his blood. On the first day of his trial, as he was being transported from the jail to the courthouse at Beaubien and Lafayette Streets, the white mob tried to snatch him away from the guards to lynch him. The guards moved him back to the courthouse before dawn to avoid the angry mob again. On this day, Faulkner was sentenced to life at Jackson State Prison. Outside, a large group of respectable citizens had gathered outside of the courthouse. They harassed Faulkner and the guards all the way to the jail. Faulkner was hit in the head with a large paving stone. And since they weren't able to do so, their rally cry of "kill all the damn niggers" aided them in ransacking, burning, and destroying colored homes and businesses. They attacked innocent bystanders as well. Throughout the early part of the day, any colored person, man, woman, or child, who happened along were subject to kicks, cuffs, and blows, and were liable to be butchered upon the streets by the white mob outside that was much larger than the day before. as they awaited Faulkner's verdict. Detroit's first race riot left 2 people dead, a multitude of coloreds savagely attacked, a number of buildings owned by coloreds destroyed and damaged by fires, of which 35 were burned to the ground. Troops from Detroit's Fort Wayne and Ypsilanti were called in to quell the riot. According to Dancing, when the Detroit City Council realized that such drastic measures were needed to restore and maintain peace, it resolved to organize a police department. As a result, the Detroit Police Department was founded with one central objective in mind: to contain racial unrest in the city. (1966) The Kercheval incident was a mini riot that started August 9, 1966. It is not well known, but involved conflict with the police, who claimed Negro student activists were loitering and causing traffic congestion on Detroit's east side on Kercheval Street. A Chronicle article, Question Closed Meetings, dated August 27, 1966, gave a partial statement from an open letter from the Socialist Workers' Party to Mayor Jerome P. Kavanaugh in defense of the Afro-American Unity Movement and what happened during the Kercheval incident. For 4 days and nights, your police flooded a predominantly Negro neighborhood on the east side with tactical mobile units, squad car patrols, and lines of marching police equipped with shotguns and rifles and fixed bayonets. More than 100 people were arrested. It was like an army occupying enemy territory. Virtual martial law. Yet your police commissioner, Girardin, repeatedly stated that there never was a plot, and he even said the elements weren't there for a riot. But your police harassed a whole neighborhood, created a false picture of terrible danger, and then engaged in wholesale arrests and charges of inciting to riot. At this time, the headquarters of the Afro-American Unity Movement, coordinated by Alvin Harrison, was located at 9211 Kercheval and had been under continuous police surveillance because Negroes frequently congregated there to do something progressive for their community. Harrison and Dowdell were 2 men arrested and charged with inciting the riot. Harrison was also charged with conspiracy. Dowdell was also charged with carrying a concealed weapon, of which he received a suspended sentence. Dowdell was convicted and placed on 5 years probation. After the riot occurred, citizens concerned about police harassment on the east side was tentatively created to make Negroes in the immediate area and throughout the city aware of the Kercheval incident. Joseph Barone, Wayne County chairman of the Freedom Now Party, was named the group's temporary chairman of its education committee. From the Chronicle article titled Group to Inform City of Kercheval Facts, dated September 3, 1966, he stated, "We want to make the black community more aware of the attitude of the police and the poor relationships between the black community and the police force because of the anti-Negro feeling of the police force. We want to tell them what they can do to change the atmosphere so that this type of incident won't be repeated." At the time of the Kercheval riot, just around the corner on Harding Street, Coleman Young, at the time of his Senate campaign, held a wake for his father at his father's house. A police officer friend of his called and informed him of the incident going down in the area and suggested that he move his friends and family away from the area for their safety. Disgruntled about the police situation on Kercheval and this disruption of his father's wake, Young used his clout and called on his political brother, U.S. Congressman Charles Diggs, some other elected officials, ministers, and community leaders, of whom were mostly Negro and a few whites. Soon there were about 60 of them marching arm in arm down Kercheval as a means to protest law enforcement's presence. In Hard Stuff, the autobiography of Coleman Young, co-authored with Lonnie Wheeler in 1994, Young stated, "As we walked, a cavalcade of tactical mobile units, police cruisers, pulled up alongside, rumbling along very slowly, bumper to bumper, as they kept their eyes on the group. One of the officers snarled at them and said, 'You goddamn niggers, get your black asses off the street.' It is important to note that the Michigan Civil Rights Commission documented 32 cases of police brutality against Negroes since '64. The July 2, 1966 Chronicle article, CRC report, cites police bias, stated numerous types of complaints, namely harassment tactics such as stopping and questioning citizens on the street, searching and arresting citizens without cause and without suspicion of wrongdoing, verbal abuse such as derogatory racial remarks, use of profane language, lack of courtesy, insulting comments, and inappropriate use of first names, and physical abuse from shoving and pushing to beating. Of even greater note, 3 weeks after the Civil Rights Report article and roughly 2 weeks before the Kirchhoff incident, Can It Happen in Detroit?, a Chronicle article dated July 23, 1966 appeared. It posed the question to local leaders and ghetto dwellers. The dwellers believed police brutality and youth restlessness could cause a mass riot because in other cities it only took one minor incident to set a riot off. Even Mayor Kavanaugh had this to say: "Detroiters would only be kidding themselves if they said it can't happen here. It always can happen when frustration mounts along with the thermometer." Besides the Kirchhoff incident, a few other incidents occurred in Detroit in 1966 that were reported. All involved the police and Negro citizens. The July 23rd article continued, "Several skirmishes broke out on Belle Isle recently when reportedly unruly citizens were forced to disperse by police, adding fuel to riot fears. Over the weekend, witnesses charged that an injured man who mistakenly assaulted a plainclothes officer on 3rd and Temple had been viciously beaten before an interracial group of about 100 persons. One witness admitted that had the feeling that the beating continued, he was ready to die." 1975. The Livernois Finkel incident, considered a minor riot, started around 8:30 p.m. on July 28, 1975 and lasted 2 days. It had been claimed by 39-year-old Andrew Shanarian, the white owner of Bob Bolton's Bar and Grill, 14907 Livernois at Chalfont near Finkel, that 3 black teenagers tried to steal a car in the bar's parking lot. He fired one shot and a bullet hit 18-year-old Obi Wynn, whom Shanarian claimed held an object in the back of the head. Blacks inside the bar who witnessed the shooting looted the bar. They also set the car on fire. Directly after Wynn had been taken to Mount Carmel Mercy Hospital, things got out of hand quickly as word spread throughout the community. However, as witnesses to the 1967 riot, older blacks were not up to any devastation. Once they knew Shanarian was in custody, they relaxed a little. It was the young blacks who started the looting, burning, and rock throwing after a report came out around 10 p.m. that Shanarian had been released without being charged. For the next several hours, rocks were thrown and windows were broken along a mile stretch of Livernois. 6 looting incidents were also reported, stated the August 2nd, 1975 Chronicle article, "Cops Hailed for Averting Riot," written by Brian Flanagan. A police officer, fireman, and Chronicle columnist Jim Ingram were also injured from thrown rocks. Police cars were vandalized, set on fire, or overturned. At least one civilian car was also overturned. A police helicopter was hit by shotgun pellets. The crowd, police said, gathered 300 people. When Coleman A. Young, Then the newly appointed first black mayor of the city of Detroit heard of the incident. He decided right then and there to stop the madness. He knew that if the predominantly white police force of the past had gone about cracking heads in the Detroit tradition, there would have been hell to pay. Young commanded then police chief Philip Tannian to call in all black police officers and merge them with the white officers already on the scene to give the department an air of racial unification. The mayor also stated in higher stuff that may have been the first time in Detroit history that black officers had been called upon for emergency police work. But no matter the color of the officer, blacks in an era of off the pigs continued to disrespect the uniform. They threw bottles and rocks at the police officers who had been commanded not to fire their guns. Racial fighting occurred on both Livernois and Finkel Streets, at the time a racially mixed area. The mayor put himself on the line by fighting attitude with attitude. He spoke angrily at the black crowd as he stood on top of a parked car. He called some of them a bunch of hoodlums and rip-off artists. The mayor was heckled by the crowd. Someone hit him with a rock, but eventually things calmed down. He also caught it from 3 white police officers who rolled up in a cruiser and threw a smoke bomb underneath a car next to where he and some other police personnel stood. Young and the officers with him jumped into a sympathetic inspector's car and chased after them but couldn't catch up with them. Somewhere along the line, however, the crowd of angry blacks regressed. Although Mayor Young walked the streets in the area and talked constantly to black youth to convince them to not burn the stores in the area, they still wanted to burn down Shanarian's bar. And they wanted the bar owner's blood. They rammed his bar with the intent to drag out to do bodily harm, but they were unsuccessful. Instead, around 11:30 p.m., 3 Detroit men pulled and dragged 54-year-old Marian Paisisko, an innocent white male of Polish descent, from his car as he drove in the area from work to home, and used a large chunk of concrete to stone him. He died 3 days later. Many riot victims' rights. Another Chronicle article written by Flanagan dated August 9, 1975 stated Ronald Bill Jordan, Raymond Peoples, and Dennis Lindsay were all later charged with the first-degree murder of Paisisko's death. The next day, after it was reported that Wynn had died and that Shanarian had been rearrested and charged with second-degree murder by Recorder's Court presiding judge Donald Leonard, who imposed a bond of $500 and 2 sureties, the angry black crowd threw rocks, burned, and looted again. However, once Leonard obtained the coroner's report that Wynn had indeed been shot in the back of his head, he called a second hearing and reset Shanarian's bond at $25,000, of which Shanarian paid and was released again. Even with respected community leaders keeping the crowd abreast of changes, they still wanted to retaliate because, in their eyes, justice had not been served. Because Young had joined the merged police force along with clergymen and other community leaders, the riot that threatened to escalate into a full-scale disturbance was quelled before it became full-blown. Damage to the area was estimated at tens of thousands of dollars. Yet, as recent as this riot was, few Detroiters know about it. Teresa, Kimble.